So I drove past the gas station here in Miami this morning, $4.09 a gallon. And look, the gas price is the obvious story right now. Everyone's talking about it. But that's actually not what I want to talk about today, because the pump is just the most visible part of what's happening. What I actually want to talk about is your grocery bill. Because here's the thing most people haven't put together yet. Every single thing you eat gets to the grocery store on a diesel truck. And diesel just jumped nearly $1 a gallon in a single week. Think about what that means for every product on every shelf in every store in this country. That's what we're doing today. We're walking through the math step by step, because nobody is doing it. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a war in the Middle East ends up on your grocery receipt. This past week, Amazon added a fuel surcharge to deliveries. JetBlue added a fuel surcharge to flights just this week. And those two things right there tell you everything you need to know about the direction this is heading. Diesel hit $4.86 a gallon as of March 9th. It was $3.86 the week before, $1 a gallon in 7 days. And diesel isn't what you put in a regular car. It's what powers the trucks, the trains, the cargo ships, the forklifts at the distribution warehouse. The entire physical movement of goods in this economy runs on diesel. So when diesel spikes like this, it's not a transportation problem. It's an everything problem. Here's how it actually hits you at the register. FedEx Ground has a published fuel surcharge structure. When diesel crosses $3.55 a gallon, a 21.5% surcharge kicks in automatically. At $4.86, that surcharge is 24.75%, almost 25 cents on every dollar of freight. And that same structure exists across every freight mode in the country: air, rail, ocean. They all have surcharge triggers tied to fuel prices. So before a single item even reaches a grocery shelf, the cost of getting it there has already jumped by nearly 25%. And here's something that most people don't think about. Those costs don't get announced. There's no press release from Kroger that says, hey, our transport cost just went up 24%. You just notice your grocery bill is higher. You just notice the yogurt that was $1.79 is now $2.19. You can't point to the exact reason, but we're pointing to it right now. Nick Friedman, the co-founder of a Tampa-based moving and hauling company, said this week that his business is getting squeezed from multiple directions at once. Higher insurance costs, a slow real estate market, and now diesel eating into every job his trucks run. He said he doesn't feel like he can raise prices because customers are already pulling back. That is the vice small businesses are in right now all across this country. And his business is just one example of what's happening to every company that touches a physical product. Now let me break down what this oil shock actually does inside a grocery store, because it doesn't hit everything at once and it doesn't hit everything the same way. The first things that move are fresh foods: produce, meat, dairy. The reason is simple. Fresh food can't wait. If a strawberry doesn't get from a farm in California to a store in Ohio in about 2 days, it's garbage. There's no flexibility in that timeline, which means the higher shipping cost gets absorbed immediately and passed on just as fast. One supply chain expert put it simply this week: food gets to the grocery store on diesel, whether it's on a truck or on a boat. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. Packaged foods are next, but take a little longer. Companies like Kraft and General Mills have inventory they've already built up. They can absorb a few weeks of higher shipping costs before they reprice. But that buffer runs out. When it does, you'll see a wave of price changes across the packaged goods aisle that'll look sudden but was actually building for weeks. That wave is coming in April and May. Watch for it. Then there's something most people have completely missed in this whole conversation: packaging. Almost all food packaging, the plastic containers, the wrappers, the bags, is made from petrochemicals, meaning it's made from oil. So when oil prices spike, the cost of manufacturing packaging spikes. At the same time, you're already dealing with higher transport costs. It's a two-hit combo on anything that comes in a package, which is most of what's in a grocery store. And the UN just confirmed this is already showing up in the data. The FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, released their global food price numbers for March just this week. Their food price index hit 128.5 points. That's a 2.4% jump from February, the highest reading in 6 months. And vegetable oil prices specifically jumped 5.1% in a single month, over 13% year over year. The FAO said directly that higher crude oil prices are driving it, because vegetable oils are now competing with the biofuel sector for the same raw material. You are literally bidding against oil refineries every time you pick up a bottle of canola oil. Now here's where it gets really specific. The FAO also reported that wheat prices jumped 4.3% in March. 2 reasons: deteriorating crop prospects in the United States and reduced planting expectations in Australia because fertilizer has gotten too expensive to justify normal usage levels. Let that sit for a second. The fertilizer shortage caused by this war is already affecting planting decisions in Australia right now, for crops that won't even be harvested for months. The food system damage from what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is being baked into next season's supply chain today, in April 2026. And we're going to feel it on the shelf well into 2027. Meanwhile, if you've been buying beef lately, you already know. The USDA just updated their food price outlook, and the numbers are not subtle. Beef and veal were 14.4% more expensive in February 2026 than they were in February 2025. That's a 14% year-over-year increase on beef alone. And the USDA is now forecasting beef prices to climb another 10% through the rest of 2026, with an upper range estimate of 18%. The reason goes back to something that started long before this war. The U.S. cattle herd has been shrinking since 2019. Consumer demand stayed strong while supply contracted, so the beef situation was already bad. The oil shock just landed on top of it. The USDA's overall food price forecast for 2026 projects a 3.6% increase across all food, but that projection was built before the full oil shock was factored in, before diesel hit $4.86, before the FAO reported a 6-month high. That 3.6% number is a floor, not a ceiling. Joseph Glauber, Emeritus Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, said it plainly this week. A lot of people had hoped we'd see food inflation decline this year. Instead, elevated food inflation appears to be with us for a while. Deutsche Bank analysts went a step further. They said they expect a 25% increase in gasoline prices to put upward pressure on overall inflation. That note came out this week. This isn't looking backward. This is what the data says right now. All right, I want to talk about something that has barely gotten any coverage, despite being maybe the most consequential long-term piece of this entire story, and that's fertilizer. Most people think of the Strait of Hormuz as an oil route, and it is, but it also carries urea, which is the primary raw material for nitrogen fertilizer, the fertilizer that grows the corn, the wheat, the soybeans. Without enough fertilizer at the right price, farmers plant less, apply less, and yields fall. Now here's the connection that should get your attention. Brazil produces about 60% of the world's soybean exports. It is one of the largest exporters of corn and sugar on the planet, and nearly half of Brazil's fertilizer supply transits the Strait of Hormuz, the same strait that's been closed since early March. The president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, Zippy Duvall, sent a letter directly to President Trump warning that American farmers were facing fertilizer supply disruptions and that it would translate into higher grocery prices for consumers. He called it a threat to food security and national security. That's the organization that represents American farmers telling the president that the food supply is at risk. And that letter didn't exactly make front-page news. Here's the domino chain. Strait closes. Fertilizer can't reach Brazil. Brazilian farmers reduce how much they apply because it's too expensive or unavailable. Soybean yields fall. Global soy supply shrinks. And soy is in everything. It's in livestock feed, in cooking oil, in processed food ingredients. When soy supply falls, the price of everything downstream goes up. Your chicken, your pork, your cooking oil, your packaged food. All of it. And the thing is, you can't fix this fast. Crop cycles don't care about market conditions. The planting decisions being made right now in Brazil will determine what's on your grocery shelf months from now. The fertilizer damage from this war is a slow-motion wave that hasn't fully landed yet. So let me give you the actual supply math on what's happened to oil, because I think most people don't have a real reference point for how severe this is. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. It carries 20% of the entire world's oil supply, more than 20 million barrels a day. Iran shut it down in early March 2026. Marine traffic has basically stopped. Ships are parking at the entrance instead of making the crossing because of drone threats. Now here's the comparison that puts everything in perspective. The 1973 oil embargo, the one that created gas lines across America, sent inflation spiraling, and wrecked an entire decade for this economy, that removed 7% of global oil supply. What's happening right now removes 20%. That's nearly 3 times the supply shock that defined the 1970s. 3 times. The International Energy Agency called this the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Their own words. WTI crude went from $67 a barrel on February 27th to $111 by March 8th. That's a 66% increase in less than 2 weeks. Brent is up 50% since military strikes began, and Qatar's energy minister has already said out loud that oil could hit $150 a barrel or higher if this continues. Bloomberg Economics ran a model on what happens if oil reaches 170. At that level, the stagflation shock roughly doubles from where we are now. U.S. government officials and Wall Street analysts have started running scenarios at $200 a barrel. That's not a fringe number anymore. The U.S. released 172 million barrels from the strategic reserve. Between us, Japan, and Germany, 400 million barrels total are being released. That covers about 20 days of global supply. 20 days. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth said this week at S&P Global's Sierra Week conference, there are very real, physical manifestations of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz that are working their way around the world. That was the CEO of one of the largest energy companies in the world. Not a doom blogger, not a YouTube channel. Chevron's CEO. And the math on alternatives is bleak. Gavecall Research found that Gulf exporters could reroute at most 3.5 million additional barrels per day through pipelines and secondary terminals. The world is facing a shortfall of 15 million barrels per day. The numbers don't come close to balancing. Now here's the part that makes all of this worse, and it's the part that almost nobody is connecting to the oil story. Because the oil shock didn't land on a comfortable, well-rested consumer. It landed on a household that was already getting squeezed from a completely different direction. Tariffs. The average U.S. import tariff rate has climbed to about 16% right now. That's the highest level since the 1930s, according to J.P. Morgan Chase. And Goldman Sachs found that American consumers and businesses absorbed 82 cents of every dollar in tariff costs in 2025. Not foreign exporters, us. Chris Barrett, an agricultural economist at Cornell, said this week that the war is a problem specifically because of what preceded it in the U.S. His words, the tariffs were already hitting food prices. Immigration enforcement changes were already driving up labor costs for farms and food processing facilities. Rising electricity prices were already adding to the cost of running a cold storage warehouse or a food processing plant. So the oil shock arrived on top of all of that. And what happens when you stack tariff-driven inflation, labor cost inflation, energy inflation, and now a diesel and fertilizer crisis on top of each other? The supply chain builds in a buffer. Every supplier, every manufacturer, every distributor that doesn't know what their costs are going to look like 3 months from now does the rational thing. They raise prices now and build in margin for the uncertainty ahead. You're not just paying for current costs. You're paying for the risk premium baked in on top of them. And if you want to know who absorbs all of that, it's the person at the checkout counter. Always. That's how this works. Now let me show you an industry where all of this is playing out in real time in numbers you can track. Restaurant stocks. Because the market is already pricing in what's coming for the food service industry, and it isn't pretty. McDonald's dropped 7% in roughly a month. Starbucks dropped 7%. Wendy's fell 10%. Chipotle dropped 15%. These aren't tiny companies with weak balance sheets. These are the biggest names in food service. And the reason their stocks are moving like this is that the people who eat at drive-thrus and coffee shops most often are the exact same people getting hit hardest by gas prices. Think about who actually spends the most time at a McDonald's drive-thru. People with long commutes, people in service jobs, people who are in their cars a lot. And when someone's monthly gas bill jumps $100 to $250, the first thing to go is the convenience spending. The drive-thru stops on the way to work, the coffee stop, the quick lunch pickup. And fast food was already in trouble before any of this. Menu prices have climbed at least 30% since 2019. A typical McDonald's combo is $12 to $18 now, depending on where you live. That is the same price range as a sit-down casual restaurant. The whole reason fast food existed as a category, that it was the cheapest option, is basically gone. Restaurant sales have dropped every single week in March since the start of the war. And these businesses are being squeezed from both ends at the same time. Fewer customers coming in, and food costs going up because they're on the same supply chain, getting hammered by the diesel spike. That combination is not sustainable for a lot of places. Some of them are going to close. And when restaurants close, that's a job, and that's someone who also stops spending. Here's the economic scenario that's being whispered about in boardrooms and central banks right now. And the reason it's so scary is that there is genuinely no clean policy response to it. Stagflation. Economic growth slows or stops while inflation keeps rising, and the Federal Reserve is stuck. If they raise rates to fight inflation, borrowing gets more expensive, businesses pull back, hiring slows, and the recession gets worse. If they cut rates to stimulate growth, inflation runs even hotter. There's no move that helps both problems at the same time. The Fed literally becomes a spectator. Jerome Powell said this week he sees no reason to raise rates because short-term oil shocks are usually something central banks look past. But that's only true if the shock is short. The longer the strait stays closed, the less this qualifies as something to look past. The 10-year Treasury yield has already jumped to 4.46%. The 30-year mortgage rate climbed to 6.38% in late March. So borrowing is getting more expensive even without the Fed doing anything, just from market pressure alone. EY Parthenon's chief economist just bumped his recession probability to 40%. Wall Street Journal economists put it at 45%. Goldman Sachs is at 30%. Every one of those numbers has moved in one direction over the past 6 weeks. And here's what people aren't accounting for. Consumer spending is about 70% of the U.S. economy. When people feel wealthy, they spend. When gas is expensive, groceries are expensive, and layoff fears are rising, they pull back. 71% of American households expect unemployment to rise this year. Consumer sentiment in 2025 recorded its lowest annual average in recorded history, and the economy was adding only 55,000 jobs a month through late 2025, the lowest pace outside of the pandemic since 2008. That is the economy this oil shock landed on. Not a healthy, well-padded economy with slack to absorb a punch. A stressed, already deteriorating system taking the hardest hit it's seen in decades. Let me bring this back down to what it actually means for a family with a real budget sitting at a kitchen table trying to figure out where the money went. The average American household spends about $2,500 a year on gas. That's roughly $50 a week before this war started. Gas has already moved from $2.98 to 4.9 cents here in Miami today. That's a 37% jump. On that baseline household spending, you're looking at an extra $80 to $100 per month just at the pump. Some families are looking at $200 more per month depending on how far they drive. Now layer grocery costs on top. Food inflation was already running at 3.1% in February. With diesel surcharges, fertilizer disruptions, FAO hitting a 6-month high, beef up 14.4% year over year, even the conservative path from here has grocery costs rising 6 to 8% by mid-year. On an $800 to $1,000 monthly grocery bill, that's another $50 to $80 per month. So you're already looking at $130 to $180 extra per month on just gas and food. For a family that's already carrying a credit card balance, already stretched on rent, already watching their car insurance go up, already seeing higher utility bills, that $150 doesn't appear out of thin air. It comes from somewhere. And when it doesn't exist to take from a savings account, it goes on the credit card, and the balance grows, and the minimum payment goes up, and the financial window gets smaller. MassMutual Wealth's chief investment officer said it this week. Discretionary spending is typically where the cycle starts. Consumers pull back from discretionary things first. If the war and its disruption is short, people dip into savings and manage it. If it's longer, they cut back on spending, which slows growth, which hits jobs, and that happens quickly. His words. There's no soft landing version of this if the strait stays closed into the summer. All right, so what do you actually do with all of this? You can't reopen the Strait of Hormuz yourself. You can't reverse the fertilizer disruption in Brazil or fix the diesel surcharge that's already baked into next month's grocery prices. What you can control is how positioned you are before the next wave of increases hits. Number 1, buy pantry staples now. Rice, beans, canned goods, cooking oil. Vegetable oil is already up 13.2% year over year, and the full supply chain impact from the war hasn't hit retail shelves yet. Buying ahead at today's prices is one of the best financial moves available to most people right now. Number 2, stop using delivery apps for food. I know it's convenient, but an $8.99 order that arrives as a $22 charge after fees and tip is not convenience. It's a wealth transfer. Cook at home. Your wallet will thank you. And honestly, so will your body. Number 3, build up your cash reserves. Goldman Sachs is projecting unemployment to hit 4.6% by year-end. Layoffs are continuing. Hiring has slowed to a crawl in a lot of sectors. If you lose your income right now with no cash buffer in a stagflationary environment, you are in a very difficult position, very fast. 6 months of expenses. That's the floor. Number 4, eliminate variable rate debt as aggressively as you can. The 30-year mortgage rate just hit 6.38%. Credit card interest is already at multi-decade highs. Every month, you carry that balance. It costs you more than the month before. Get out of variable debt before the next round of rate pressure hits. And one more thing, the CPI report drops this Friday, and it will be the first reading that actually reflects the full first month of the war. Deutsche Bank said this week, the impact of the largest energy supply shock since the 1970s will certainly be on full display in that report. We'll break it down for you as soon as it's out. Subscribe so you don't miss that. Share this if you know someone who needs to understand what's coming, and I'll see you in the next one.